thank you very much for coming along today, and g'day everyone. Thank you for joining our session today on supporting owners through the challenges of continuing airworthiness. My name's Shaun Holmes. I'm one of the aviation safety advisors with CASA, and I work from CASA's Sydney office. You'll also see the other gentleman on the screen, Marshall Ross, who is a surveillance manager with CASA from our Brisbane office. We'll be both delivering the presentation today. So just a couple of things before we get started. You'll notice that your cameras and microphones are switched off, and they will be throughout the presentation. There will be some time at the end of the presentation. Both Marshall and I will speak for about 15 to 20 minutes, and we'll leave about 10 minutes or so at the end of the presentation for any questions, any feedback, that sort of thing. To do that, on the top area of your Teams, you'll see the little chat bubble. Please open up the chat section and just drop your questions, comments, anything of that nature into there, and we will work on answering your questions at the end of the webinar. Look, anything that we may not be able to answer during the webinar, we'll make sure that we can follow that up, if that's possible, to your email address following the webinar. Now, as with previous webinars, this webinar is recorded and it will be available on our CASA YouTube in the coming weeks as well to review, or if you have some other interest and would also like to pass that on to some friends or colleagues as well. So, as I mentioned, we're here to talk about some of those areas that aircraft owners and registered operators can potentially struggle with continuing airworthiness, and probably more importantly, those areas that as engineers and maintenance organisations that you're having to really support and be, we recognise that you are the main person that the owners are coming to for that information, for that support, for that guidance, and we recognise how much time and effort that can take up for you as well. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we'll have a look at some of the key challenges that owners face, aware that, that's probably quite an easy one to answer, but I think it's important that we have a look at some of the more specific areas that owners will struggle a little bit with, and those are probably the key areas that they're asking you about and getting that guidance from you on day to day. We'll also have a look at, well, how do we break through that workload and get our owners to be more informed and have a higher level of education and understanding. So we'll have a look at how we can support owners' compliance and record keeping, and some practical tips and starting those conversations, and just helping you think about, well, how could this be addressed to make it easier for both parties? Because we recognise that this is very much a partnership when we talk about the continuing airworthiness and maintenance of an aircraft. And Marshall will also give us some regulatory insights to give us that base and help us understand what are the most important regulations that we're dealing with, and what are sort of some of the things that we might see from a regulatory perspective to consider as well. Okay, so we'll move on to some of the key challenges that owners face. I'll acknowledge that, look, there are certainly a lot of aircraft owners that are very proficient and have a good understanding of what's required, but we also recognise that there are also some owners out there that get very excited in the purchase of the aircraft and maybe aren't as aware and lack knowledge of their regulatory responsibilities, and that they are responsible for the continuing airworthiness of the aircraft. Okay, so look, often, as we know, owners may be approaching a maintenance organisation, and they're relying on you to do a lot of that heavy lifting for them, and that's something that the industry has become in a position where that is a service that, as I mentioned, you're providing. So, well, why does that occur? Like I said, there's certainly a lack of knowledge and awareness from the owner's perspective. They may not have done their research prior to buying an aircraft. It may not have been something that they looked into or received some advice or education on before diving into being an aircraft owner. It may be that they have some pre-existing expectations that if I, like my car, take my aircraft to the maintainer, then they'll maintain the aircraft for me and manage all of those areas. It could be that when pilots are learning how to fly, they're often at flight training organisations where continuing airworthiness is managed quite well and managed by staff at a flight training organisation. So they may not get that level of knowledge and that deeper understanding of some of the maintenance regulations beyond seeing a document like a maintenance release and seeing the information that's on a maintenance release. They may see what a schedule of maintenance is on a maintenance release, but not really understand to any greater depth from there. So we recognise that's probably, you know, the biggest challenge for you as engineers and maintenance organisations is working through some of that lack of knowledge and awareness and making sure that owners are able to understand some of those areas. To break that down a little bit more, managing defects and unscheduled maintenance. Okay, some owners might struggle with actually identifying a defect because it could be something that is a little bit more difficult to identify, that they may need some support from yourself and the maintenance organisation to be able to deal with. So things like a fraying or expired seatbelt or missing placards or that sort of thing may be difficult for an owner to understand, well, is this a defect or an unserviceability? And that they may also struggle to determine whether it's a permissible unserviceability and how it could be entered onto a maintenance release, or whether it should be entered onto a maintenance release, and what to do with that information. We also recognise there's potentially some commercial aspects as well of not wanting to bug you as an engineer or avoid that communication as well. So we can certainly see that owners may struggle to manage those defects correctly, and I'm sure you probably have aircraft that come to you that have, you know, varying different levels of that occurring, and that's something that you're working through with the owners to help them understand better how to manage that situation. Maintenance planning and record keeping. Okay, we understand that there's probably some owners out there that are relying on you as a LAMI or the maintenance organisation to use your, you know, it could be that you have maintenance tracking software or you know, however you're doing it, to track those aircraft times, component times, airworthiness directives and service bulletins, that sort of thing. So they're relying on you having that information and informing them of that information as well, which you recognise that can place you know, a bit of workload on you as an engineer and a maintenance organisation as well. Okay, it can potentially cause problems when we talk about future inspections costs, thinking ahead, and understanding, and the owner being able to plan for, you know, the next 6, 12, 24 months with their aircraft as well. So the last point I'd like to mention is managing spares and pilot maintenance. So pilots and owners may not be aware of how to adequately oversight consumables and spares. So things like oil, tires and tubes, that sort of thing. They may not have a suitable level of training or knowledge when it comes to conducting pilot maintenance. And I'm sure, again, that there's probably times where you have to spend some time working with an aircraft owner in terms of pilot maintenance that may have been conducted, or they're asking that question about what can I and can't I do in terms of aircraft maintenance, or do I need to come and see you to have this defect or item repaired? So we can see through that, we recognise that that does put quite a lot of load on you as a maintenance provider, and we can see that there are some benefits there, in having those conversations, and as I mentioned, having our aircraft owner more informed, more and better educated, it certainly makes life much easier for both parties. So what can we do, or what could we do to support our aircraft owners as a maintenance engineer, as a maintenance organisation? Well, as I mentioned, one of the big things I think is that communication is key, and not shying away from those conversations, and making it very clear that the owner has responsibilities under the regulations, what they're responsible for, making sure that you set clear expectations, okay? Agreeing on the responsibilities of both parties. What will this look like? What services will you provide? What are potential future maintenance and maintenance costs? So we recognize there can be commercial elements of setting clear expectations, okay? For a lot of aircraft owners, I think cost can be a significant factor. So making sure that they're well informed, they understand the service that you're going to provide, they understand what is required of them. That could be things like you may track the component times for the aircraft within your maintenance tracking system, but you might, following maintenance or scheduled inspection, provide the owner with a run-out sheet so they can see a lot of those continuing airworthiness items. As I mentioned, education is extremely important. So look, we recognise that your time's going to be limited. So there is going to be some difficulties in really sitting down and going through the nuts and bolts of those specific areas. We do have a large amount of guidance material for aircraft owners. So what I will do is I'm just going to drop a couple of links into the chat for everyone to some of our guidance material. And when I talk about guidance material, I mean advisory circulars and caps, okay? So we do have an advisory circular AC 104, which is registered operator responsibilities for continuing airworthiness, which is an extremely good document that we would certainly encourage all registered operators and owners to have a good thorough reading through. We have a long list of caps, which discuss things like the maintenance release, maintenance requirements for Class A and Class B aircraft, Schedule 8 guidance, maintenance schedules, have a cap on 100.5 maintenance of aircraft general requirements as well. So I've dropped a couple links into the chat there. One of those is to our guidance material so that you can access the advisory circulars, the caps, and also the link to airworthiness, which gives some direction off to things like ADs, airworthiness bulletins, and some other airworthiness data as well. So there's certainly some opportunity there. If you are having those discussions, please, by all means, include some of that information in those discussions with those aircraft owners, and to get them reading and a little bit more educated. Now, we recognise that just sitting down and reading a document can be a little bit dry and boring for some people, and we understand that. So some organisations do offer seminars, workshops, that sort of thing to educate aircraft owners, and we also would recognise and recommend owners consider, aircraft owners clubs or organisations as well, which often provide quite a significant amount of support and knowledge and information to aircraft owners as well. So really the goal here is to, as I mentioned, have an owner that is more aware, more educated, and they're able to understand their responsibilities and ideally take some of that workload off you as an engineer or a maintenance organisation. Now, when we talk about organisations, Okay, certain organisations are required under the regulations to manage continuing airworthiness, and they'll very likely have a person or persons at an organisation that deal with continuing airworthiness. It's certainly worth having those conversations if you're looking after organisations' aircraft or all of their aircraft, to consider that guidance material as well, and having those conversations about improving their level of knowledge. So there's certainly some good information out there to start with, and I think it's important that we just start thinking about how can we, make this easier for both parties and improve that level of knowledge. Okay, so what I will do now is just hand over to Marshall. It looks like he's back in the seat, so I'll hand over to you, Marshall. And Marshall's going to give us some regulatory background and some insights as well. Thanks very much, Marshall.
Thanks, Shaun. Yeah, it's amazing how you just about have to start coughing just before you have to take over these sorts of things. So I guess at the risk of trying to bore people too much, there are certain regulations that, as we know, cover these things that Shaun's been discussing. Would like to just say that it's really important to determine who's ultimately responsible for the continuing airworthiness of their aircraft. And as Shaun has intimated, it is the registered operator. Unfortunately, under the old regs, it still says in 41 that the registration holder is responsible for the continuing airworthiness. There's a transitional reg, CASR 202-222, which clears that up. The other one that we typically find on a regular basis when we're carrying out surveillance or audits on operators or carrying out ramp checks on aeroplanes and looking at logbooks, etc., is that quite often the logbook statement, which is required under 42E, which is the election, as you all probably aware, are generally out of date. 9 times out of 10 is because the aeroplane's been sold to another registered operator and they aren't aware of their obligations under the regs to ensure that they submit a new one with their name on it, pretty much, which tells whoever's maintaining the aircraft what system of maintenance or what maintenance schedule the aircraft is operating under, is being maintained under, either 42A, which is the manufacturer's, 42B, the CASA maintenance schedule, or an approved system of maintenance. That is the most common finding we have when we carry out audits. The other one is maintenance releases. Issuing maintenance releases. Sorry, I digress. Logbooks is another one. We typically only find out about issues with logbooks when registered operators call us to tell us that their maintenance organization won't give them their logbook back or logbooks back. Typically, we know that that's obviously maybe a commercial dispute on, and we don't have any regulatory power to force anybody to hand over any logbooks. However, it is important that the operator realizes that they're actually responsible for the logbooks of their aircraft. Unfortunately, in my experience over many years, that typically engineers have made a rod for their own back by becoming the de facto maintenance controller for registered operators, and have sort of lulled the registered operator into a false sense of security that they don't have to worry too much about the maintenance requirements on their aircraft. Their maintainer will do that. And we all know that that works fine until it goes pear-shaped. The other one we typically find is maintenance is on maintenance releases. Maintenance releases being issued with not all of the maintenance being carried out. As you're aware, as an engineer, before you sign a maintenance release, you need to ensure that all of that maintenance has in fact been carried out before you can issue the maintenance release. Under Part 43, it's quite clear. There's a couple of things that have happened when the new regs came in, things like charter and so on disappeared. We still find some maintenance releases issued with the old terminology on it. It's important also to make sure that the maintenance schedule on that maintenance release is the current maintenance schedule. Again, we find maintenance releases issued with old maintenance schedule information on from the logbook statement that hasn't been changed. The other one is a age-old problem, as Shaun alluded to, recording defects or permissible unserviceabilities on the maintenance release. It's amazing how often I'll walk into a hangar on an audit and an aeroplane's just landed, and the defect seems to occur just as the aeroplane's landing. So I'm just happy that they're going to record the defect on the maintenance release. Quite often what will happen when I walk in on an audit is I'll see a defect list handwritten, left on an engineer's or chief engineer's bench, where the registered operator has given him a list of snags that's not on the maintenance release. Again, it's really important that you educate the registered operator about recording defects on the maintenance release. That way everybody knows what's wrong with the aeroplane and when it's been rectified. Again, as Shaun intimated, what's a permissible unserviceability? Well, there's not too many permissible unserviceabilities. There's a reasonable amount of information about them. Those operators who are fortunate enough to have an MEL makes that a hell of a lot easier, because that's where they're pretty well constrained to what they can actually fly with and endorse on the maintenance release. And it's the same thing with the defects. They have to be endorsed on the maintenance release, and they have to be cleared on the maintenance release before you issue a new maintenance release. And that's another typical finding we'll have on audits, is defects not cleared on the maintenance release, on the old maintenance release. And that's pretty much me, Shaun.
Thanks very much for that, Marshall. So look, I'm just looking at the meeting chat at the moment. Do any of the attendees at this stage have any questions that you would like to put to Marshall or myself? Is there anything you'd like answered at the moment? Okay, look, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, this has been recorded. It will be available on our CASA Briefing YouTube page over the next couple of weeks. Thank you all very much for attending. It was great to have you here, and I hope that you've got even just a little something to take away from today, and maybe a way of starting those conversations and thinking about how you might be able to assist or work together with your customers and your aircraft owners. So again, thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day. Cheers.